All right, we got another episode 14. We have a very special guest with us today, Joshua. We've been talking, chopping it up for some time. Been trying to get you on the show for a long time now. Finally able to actually do it. And today's topic is going to be just like pretty much how he got into, his licensed social, how he became a licensed social worker, and if he had any mental health challenges along the way, or if he still has some. So go ahead and introduce yourself, brother. Where you from and what you do, and then we can get into the topic here.
Got you, man. Thanks for having me. Last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, so the demand for people and also the demand for own self care during a month where a lot of people want you to be involved in things is really important. But I knew I had to come back to this because anybody that just reaches out for any type of knowledge or need or want support of mental health, is really important for people to know there are people out here that are doing the work and are constantly trying to raise that awareness and provide education. And that's one of the things that I lead with. My name is Joshua Barnett. I am from the South Side of Chicago. I am a licensed social worker. What got me into mental health, did a symposium last week. I've been kind of getting away from my story, but I've been more encouraged to talk about it because it's not something that people live with every day. One of the biggest traumas and things that I've dealt with in the city of Chicago is being a gunshot victim. And upon that, I definitely survived a situation where I suffered a gunshot wound to the head. And a lot of it was leading to my own lack of emotional intelligence and dysregulation with my emotions. And didn't even know I wanted to go to college until I almost lost my life. And that really started to influence and motivate me to getting out the city of Chicago and doing something different. I went to the University of Iowa. I received my undergraduate degree in sports recreation management. And in that process, I went through a lot of tribulations and trials as a college student while handling that same trauma from the city of Chicago. Upon those times where I was in college, I just always wanted to be in sports. I always wanted to work in sports management. And then I really wanted to work with athletes off the performance platform. To say domestic violence, I hear about all of these mental challenges that athletes face when they're not performing that impacts their performance on the field or also in their current lives, which is unaddressed trauma and situations. But when I got into mental health, my first job as an outpatient counselor, I realized that it was more than just about athletes. The demand is needed all over. I learned about mental health with older adults. I was a rehab specialist working with people who had, independency issues due to any mental health disorders or just the lack of resources. There's when I learned a lot about how important it is to know about mental health. And that encouraged me to move to Chicago, where I worked at a psych hospital. And I started working with youth, at Morgan Park as a counselor for a program called BAM, Becoming a Man. And I also was a mental health specialist at a psych hospital called Hartgrove. So I was doing those back and forth from 7:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night, getting a lot of the school setting of mental health and working with the youth to adults, pediatrics, and adolescents from a acute mental health standpoint where the support and the mental health is very severe. And upon doing all of that work, it influenced me to get into social work. It was needed as I was working in those settings. It was seeming like I was having a little bit more of issues with staff more than I was with the people I was taking care of. And I wanted to be a part of someone who helped coach and train and teach people on how to treat others in different settings. And, I went to University of Illinois, got a scholarship paid for by my employer. It was just right on time. It was a blessing how it happened. And that was at Jane Addams at UIC. Started working there. After I came from there, then I started working with veterans. I left working with youth in 2023. So I've been working with veterans now in the homeless department. And now I also do psychotherapy, specializing in trauma. And I just finished my CADC internship. That's a certified alcohol drug counselor. So it's a lot. I'm trying to sum that all up in once with my motivation, a little bit of my trauma, my areas of expertise, the areas I've been in, and kind of where I am now. So I facilitate men's groups if I can. I work for a nonprofit. I help a nonprofit called Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health. I do psychotherapy on the north side in Lakeview. And then I work with the homeless veterans, helping them find any mental or physical health support and help them get off the streets, find homes, and now maintain that home stability and mental health. So
God, you do a lot.
yeah.
No wonder why you're so busy. That makes sense now. Yeah, you're a really busy brother, but it's the work is needed in our communities.
And I love the work too. I'm not just an individual that's like, oh, I'm doing the work because I think people need it. It comes from me understanding the benefit is brought in my life first, which leads my passion to now want to help others not be in a hole that they don't need to be in like I did. I didn't have people like me, growing up, and maybe me, I wouldn't have gotten shot. Maybe there's a lot of situations I wouldn't have been in, but a lot of the times, even with trauma, one thing I work on is helping people heal through trauma, but also be empowered from that trauma to say, how can I make that a part of my story and help others and grow for myself? And I think that's why I did. I turned some of my most valuable lessons into things that help me grow in areas that I can also help others.
Mhm. So yeah, speaking of when you got shot, like does that feel like do you feel like you don't trust as many people around your circle, or how did you kind of like navigate that situation when it happened to you, and if you're still processing it? Like what's some of the things that like you're kind of going through? Like, do you trust people, or are you less trusting? What's the deal with that?
It happened in 2006, and honestly, what led me afterwards, it wasn't really about trust. It was my ego was strongly impacted, so much to the point where I made a few choices afterwards that let me know that my ego was leading how I felt about being shot. With the youth these days, and even with males, that ego really can drive our ability to lead with our emotions first, almost to the point where I almost did something I almost didn't make it afterwards. So it was being hard headed, is surviving in something that was a blessing, and then putting myself in a situation again as if I didn't learn my lesson. And that's what ego and the lack of having a support system can do. But also to answer the question about trust, yeah, trust was hard because at the end of the day, it already kind of was an issue before I even was shot. Uh, People kind of telling me about some of the decisions that I was making in the first place, and me ignoring it led up to, I believe, that incident happening in the first place. Trust came from any sense of judgment, lack of understanding me, and more of telling me what to do or telling me what I should do without even considering how I feel. Definitely leads to lack of trust, even if that message comes with love, even if that is some of the best information I can receive based on my trauma, based on my uh, feeling of support and safety within self and others. It can still be thrown right out. It goes in one ear and out the other because I'm not feeling probably emotionally secure first. And if I'm not feeling emotionally secure or safe, that means everything that's conveyed to me is not going to be received.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times when I was younger, I grew up with I had trust issues really bad, even in relationships when I was dealing with, my exes, my ex-girlfriends, and they always wanted to know why you're not vulnerable, or why don't let your heart, be open to love and stuff like that. And then, when I got into just dealing with, black male friendships, the trust was really, I really had to watch who I was around, because when you live in, the inner cities and in the hood, like you always have to kind of like be watching your back, because you never know when something's about to pop off, right?
Yeah, the
Man.
hypervigilance is real.
So I'm always watching, even when brothers come up and, give me dap, sometimes it's just like, sometimes it's like, should I be friendly or should I be guarded, in a
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
situation.
I remember
So
in college one time, just to share a story. In college one time, my first experience from the world I live in, the world is so much bigger than my world, is I was on the University of Iowa campus, and I never forget, it was like nighttime, and it was, a gentleman trying to run up on me, but not run up on me. He just wanted to know what time it was. Man, as soon as that man opened up his mouth, I turned around and I immediately put my guards up. And he's like, man, I just want to know what time it is. And I'm like, oh man, it's so and so. Like, you got me all hyped up, and that's why I was just like, yeah, it really is. I'm not, somebody that was working with me as a mentor at the time was like, you're not in Chicago anymore, and it's our body, like our functions to how we have to survive. It merges with us into other environments, and so here's as a place where I felt so comfortable that I felt uncomfortable, and that's when I knew that it definitely was a thing.
And then, even going through childhood trauma,
Mm-hmm.
like that could, play a role into how sometimes we interact with people too, because like we're still dealing with our own issues internally, whether it's not trusting family. So sometimes it's hard to translate to trust a stranger. That's kind of being friendly as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any of those experiences where like maybe you had either bad friendships or bad relationships, or just had like a very dysfunctional family that kind of translated into how you dealt with your adult friends as you got older?
Oh, absolutely. I I feel like now today, as I'm part of healing is being able to understand who you were and not being ashamed of it. I believe I was a huge follower growing up, and very loyal to the fault of expense of myself. And what happens with that is, when loyal and fault to self and neglect of self, people pleasing can easily be a thing that can be a part of who I am. And because of that, and then mirroring it with being raised and growing up and being told what to do, and have to be having that discipline, or that, the whole, why you have to do that because I said so. I can't stand that, to this day. And I tell people that because it robbed me from a lack of getting any understanding of what I'm doing, and feeling that rapport back, to feel like I have a space, an emotional space, as I shared earlier. And the lack of emotional space and doing something because someone said so, and then molding into my friendships and just doing things because, following to fit in, and now all these things between what I do starts to be about, tied to my identity. Now what I also do for others also needs to be tied to my identity and my likeness. And in that process, I stopped neglecting myself. I stopped feeling like I have emotional security or safetyness within being growing up on the parental side, but then with friends, with that lack of emotional security, and feeling like I have to um, be a follower and not pay attention to myself. Now I kind of neglect myself and my own conscience. So now, in that same way, it's lack of vulnerability. Where do I go? I can't go here because I feel like I'll get shut down, and I can't go here because I feel like I'll be judged. So here I'll be judged by people who I feel connected to and they're friends, and here I don't feel judged, but I feel like I'll be punished for feeling like expressing myself emotionally. Where do I go? I don't. I decide. I hold my things in. I deal with it how I will, and I find my own impulses to find a way of learning to express myself.
Do you feel like, and this will be the last time because I know this might still be a little bit of unresolved trauma there in terms of
Mhm.
getting shot, but like, do you feel like that has changed your perspective about how you deal with people in life? Or do you feel like that has changed, I'm still working with dealing with people, but I'm kind of like, I'm not so quick to make friends in a sense like that. How does that, being shot change your perspective about certain things in life?
So one thing, I mean, it is resolved. I understand. Part of understanding our trauma is, why it hurt us, what it meant to us, what did it do to us. Being able to have feelings and expressing emotions, and what was the true feelings behind, the thing that happened, what was happening in the way, what I learned from it, how I see myself now, and is that a healthy way if I see myself now or not. I'm fully healed from it. So much to the point where I'm finally talking about it. A lot of times I didn't even want to talk about it because I felt like it was like a bragging situation. I felt like it would be something that someone would say, oh, you're just leading with that because you're, just the way that things are there. But then I'm realizing more it's a story. And as a clinician, I'm starting to learn how to mold that story into letting it be teachable lessons. There's nothing more teachable of a lesson than me being shot than teaching people about emotional dysregulation and the lack of expressing emotions leading to impulses to put myself in a situation that almost killed me because I had an ego. More of the story I'll probably share later another time, but my feelings was hurt based on a situation. I didn't like how I felt later on that night. I wanted revenge, and here we have it. And that's the story of how me not expressing myself, having that emotional dysregulation, not having emotional security, not having a support system to let people know how I really feel, to relieve that and not feel like it carried with me on till later on in that day. And how I carry how I see others is I pretty much kind of treat people in the sense of everyone has their own story, and how someone might come off, there might be a reason. I keep sharing this Ted Lasso. This has been the best quote that I've heard in a while, and it's what, 2 months old now, but he says, be curious, not judgmental. I've been really taking that with me when I talk to people, because when I look at my relationships and with people, before I be judgmental, I'd be curious, like, why are you, treating me that way? Or why did you feel the way to say that to me? And to be curious, sometimes you do have to have some regulation to self, because if you're dysregulated, you don't care. You're not curious. You care about the situation. And the emotional intelligence is understanding how I feel, but also being able to see where someone else might be feeling and coming from too, enough to be able to approach the situation in a possible way. So now I don't feel that anxiety as much when it comes to conversation with friends or family. And even though it's there, I don't let it now put me in an avoidance. I use it as is, oh, so I'm uncomfortable how this conversation, which means the conversation needs to be had, but also why am I uncomfortable? It's exploring the things that make me nervous and scared, and realizing that pattern of where it might come from, but now being empowered to be a little bit more curious about it. And I tell you, half the time, it's usually I'm tripping, or I thought I knew the situation, and it opened up my eyes to a perspective of how that person was feeling. And it actually ended up growing and curating a stronger relationship. Me and you kind of talked about earlier, you brought up friends, and, sometimes, especially with men, there are a lot of surface level conversations out of that out of that fear and that lack of emotional support. And these strong conversations, we got to test our friends. And I'm not saying in the testing, I have friends now where I had said, bro, I ain't gonna lie, I was afraid to have that conversation with you. And it's like, why would you be afraid of it? And now boom, immediately I'm thinking, uh-oh, he asked me why I'd be afraid. Now what I'm gonna say next? It's like, well, I'll be afraid because, and then it's like, oh, bro, I didn't even know that you like felt that way. That's some vulnerability now, because I just let somebody know that I was scared or nervous about how he might feel or react. But man, that is how you find out how strong your friendships can go, because now when I'm feeling something, I don't have to feel like I avoided those strong conversations I'm talking to you about now, that those experiences, that example will make me feel more motivated and safe on having something that I need to have, versus feeling like, based on that last conversation I didn't have, or me assuming how bad it would go, that fear will make me just avoid it altogether. And so I've started coming up with this thing we're calling schoolyard BS. I can kick it with my boy. I can watch sports with him. I could talk about women with him. We could talk about clothes, athletes, LeBron James, who win in the finals. But I talk about, I was scared yesterday. I was worried about that test I was taking. I thought I might almost lost my job. man, I've been really feeling out of place with the world lately. I'm just so overwhelmed. Man, that is some vulnerability that you don't know what nobody will do with it. But then again, if you call them your friends, what better opportunity to find out if that can grow or if that is what it is than having that hard conversation and having a fear that that result will be something that could hurt you. But you know what, at the end of the day, if it does, then at least you know. But the other end of that is, if you don't know, that might be something that will deprive you and that person from growing together.
Yeah, and then I just got two more questions, and then I'll wrap this up here. Because usually my audience tap out around the 20-minute mark.
That's real.
Yeah, I always look at my analytics and I see that. So it's like, they don't like to watch more than 20, 30 minutes or so, but that's just the way it is. But I think that sometimes men hold a lot of things in internally, and we don't always process, or we don't always say things on our mind. Because I had a friend that committed suicide last year, and that took a toll on me because we trauma bonded. We had a whole group chat talking about our problems, things like that. It was really popping. It was a bunch of 4 brothers in the group. It was relatively new. We only knew each other for maybe about a year or so. So maybe there wasn't as much trust as we thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
But, I just always think to myself, when he had a good group of brothers around him that didn't judge, we never judged each other. We just kind of like took word for word for what the person said. Like we never, followed back up with condescending marks or anything like that about what somebody was going through. We just kind of like bonded in trauma, and, I always still to this day just wonder, like, why couldn't he come talk to us? So why do you think men are just so hesitant, even if they think they have strong guy friends or they have people that they can trust? Why do you think they're still so hesitant to really open up?
It takes just as much history as we have on not feeling like we are comfortable being vulnerable. Things don't happen overnight. We can't just all now get into mental health and think that our old ways, old habits, or ways that we learned how we have to cope doesn't come out. It actually comes out more times than not. That's why mental health awareness is so important, because we are practicing building other parts of our subconscious to activate that there is another option to our problems. And doing that often will give us this awareness that this isn't the only option. And it's still a hard thing to do because it's not something that we learned. We was conditioned for so long for these things that we talk about, so much to the part. It's a part of our identity. It is who we all are. It's one of those stereotypes that they say this is what a man is. And when that starts being attached to your identity, anything that starts to questioning it will easily make you turn off. And I talked earlier about that uncomfortability feeling, that restriction of even fighting something if you feel might be helpful. But still, that pattern and that conscience of knowing what you know best, even if it's not the best option. I think it's still hard for men too, especially if they still haven't had enough practice, enough of those patterns to continue to realize that this is an option. Constantly talking, constantly having those conversations, like I said last time, and being able to, a lot of times, those signs that a brother is depressed or be going through it are already there. And when they're already there, there have been so many moments where they have been ignored or they already have been given an answer. Usually those signs, when people kind of talk about, suicide ideations, sometimes those things don't happen overnight. Sometimes there's a buildup, and there were moments where there was evidence where that was depression or that buildup. And that's why we always assess when people talk about any sign of depression, because the severity could be suicide ideations to actual thoughts, plans, and intent. It's a buildup of that neglect and not checking and assessing with people to where it gets to a point where that person makes that choice. And my experience from working with people who I've lost clients to suicide. And one of the biggest things that I had to learn from it is not beat myself off about it, because if a person is going to make that choice, they're going to make that choice. But also at the same time, knowing that if my intentions was to help them and it was there, and I was doing what I could, taking that with the fact that I wasn't neglectful and I was there for them, I did everything I could, but not being able to take that blame. And so when a lot of that self thing, though, that self judgment and fear comes in, we hear it all the time in the language. And then people say, "Oh, you need help, or you need support, or don't kill you, don't, you shouldn't harm yourself. Think what I would think about you. Think about your friends." I know we on for time, but I'll never forget this story. Somebody at the psych hospital told me. He told me, it's like, hey, when I think about think about suicide, everybody always tell me about my kids will miss me. Everybody tell me about what my friends and family would think about if I did it. And immediately in that subject, you hear nothing about me. You hear about how people would feel or how much I impacted the world would, but nothing about me. And that's the kind of neglect where those are very small, subtle things that they don't help. Sometimes they can make them worse. So we can at least also, if we can help within that friend group you're talking about, it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, now let's see if we can guide them to a professional. Because sometimes all we can do is guide, but we can't fix.
And then the last question is, where can people find you at? And if you are accepting clients, how does that work?
So I'm currently not accepting clients, and I am currently working on a better way to market myself. I'm one of those individuals that, despite the fact I'm a clinician, a lot of my trauma is the lack of wanting to feel like I need to get myself out there. That fear of what people would think about me is real. We clinicians are people too. And, when we're not giving advice to people or leading or helping, trying to work on people's healing, we still deal with our own challenges. That's why I have a therapist as a clinician. I can only give right now, my information is speakingupsolutions@gmail.com. That's speaking up, solutions@gmail.com. That's an email. My Instagram, I think it's AG@JBSurvivor25. I really haven't built a platform yet for people to follow me and things like that. But I, will say when people reach out to me through that email or information, if I can provide that space or someone find me on Facebook or Instagram, I don't mind having that conversation or seeing how I can assist them. I am currently working on finding different ways to market myself and get myself out there as the demand is there. But right now I'm currently working on my studies. I have some exams coming up that will give me stronger and more, advanced licensure that will put me in a position to get myself out there and actually really having a platform. Right now I don't, but in the meantime, I don't mind having conversations like this, any kind of conversation, pretty much, and just try to provide space, facilitating a space where me as a clinician and me as a person could just educate or just even provide a space if I can.
All right. Well, it's been nice talking to you. I gotta go now, but I will follow back up with you about the group. I'm gonna send you the link so you can join the group and all of that, and then we can facilitate like sometime in July or something like that for you to facilitate the meeting. And it's a really good group of brothers, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. And my condolences, and man, thanks for continuing to use the platform and you're investing your time to raise mental health awareness for brothers and anybody that needs it. I truly appreciate it.
Yes. And thank you again, Joshua.
Absolutely, man.